Morning, everyone.
Hey.
We all fueled with mimosas. Yeah? Gonna woo! Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. Extremely excited, everybody, to see all these lovely faces. Also to be hosting this really exciting panel today. I'm in an elite company. I'll go on to introductions very shortly. But to kick things off, what we'll be covering today is speaking about, specifically the agency advantage, how the team here are bridging that gap between brands, creators, getting ahead of the curve, and everything to go with that. My name is Henry Worthington. I am a Senior Client Success Manager on the enterprise team at CreatorIQ. And extremely honored, privileged to be with this lovely lot on here today. So to my left, I have Crystal Malakias. Crystal is the Global Co-Managing Director and Global Head of Influencer for McCann and McCann Content Studios. Next to Crystal, we have Emily Hare. Emily is the Global Influencer Lead for the Publicis Group. And then on the end, quite far away, Julie, this is the furthest we've been away for a while. We've got Julie Chadwick, who is the Managing Director of Dentsu Creative. So extremely, extremely excited to get tucked into this conversation today. I think what's incredibly interesting about all of this is how agencies really sit at the crossroads, the intersections between brands, creators, getting ahead of the curve. You essentially are the curve before it even happens. So understanding strategies, implementing those strategies, but also being really consultative to clients in an ever-changing industry. So really excited to get into that today. So I think to kick off, what would be very, very cool is to really understand the strategic role that you guys have on the agency side. So starting off slightly more broad, would love to know a little bit more on each of your guys' opinions is, from an agency perspective, you guys are pivotal in the role of the industry is at the moment. And I guess sitting in that intersection between brands and creators, especially with cultural movements involved as well, what unique value do you guys bring? Maybe, Crystal, you can kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me. Full room, wow. I think McCann's perspective on this is a very unique one. We've existed since 1912, and McCann has always been about one thing, and that is building enduring brands. And I think, in all honesty, we're all part of this incredible industry, and I've been for over a decade. We're kind of navigating the huge amount of commoditization in this industry right now. And it's creating a lot of clutter, it's creating a lot of noise, and a lot of brands are saying, where is the ROI? Where do I go from here? I'm spending a lot of money. Is it working? Isn't it? And I think where we sit is to say, really, what we want to do is try and help brands, to build that enduring brand on social. And of course, influencers and creators are at the epicenter of that. So I think for us, kind of at the tip of the spear, as a leading creative agency, it's about really understanding from the very beginning what the strategic output is, what we're really trying to do by using creators. It's not about, many years ago saying, we know we need creators, can you find me 20 fashion influencers or creators? And off you trot and try and do it. Now it's really getting under the skin of what the brief is asking, what communities we're talking to, what other uses of media are we working with? And then how do creators sit with that? And so our team in McCann Content Studio is heavy on influencer strategists. And they are the backbone of what we do. And they've really seen now the difference of output for many of our clients. I think that's kind of a long way around of saying how we are actually now about making sure that social is a place where you build brands, which I don't think it has been over the past few years.
Shall I carry on?
Go for it.
I think agencies have the potential to zoom out, so they're not so deep in one specific brand, but they're able to think like, how can we share the learnings from one vertical to another, from one client to another, and so can bring that kind of perspective as well as things like relationships with different social platforms and the teams of deep experts. I think there's an advantage to brands in working with agencies from that point of view. So you get that kind of learnings from across a range of verticals that can really like benefit you. And then I think also from that kind of zoomed out perspective, thinking about not just influencer social in isolation, but thinking about it as part of a bigger brand strategy. Like, what are you trying to achieve long term? How does it fit into the wider media creative mix as well? Because I think like influencers are amazing. They can work across the entire funnel, but thinking when the whole agency understands like how can that fit into planning and things like that is when it can really start to sing.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that actually, and I spent like first half of my career as a client as well, and I think there can be nothing more valuable when you're a client as having a really strong strategic partner in an agency that can give you that outside-in perspective, and in an industry that is changing all the time. We did a report recently speaking to lots of CMOs across the world, and whilst all of them said influencer creator marketing was top of their agenda, they still said the vast majority of them were really worried both about showing that return on value, about that shifting from almost controlling to conducting their brand in these spaces. And actually what they're looking for are that real strong strategic partners that are going to help guide them through this period.
And if I could just add to that, I think where agencies have now come in is, 10 years ago, influence marketing was mainly done by smaller agencies that didn't sit inside the big networks. And I think what we're all seeing together, we've just spent, I think, the past 24 hours together, haven't we? Which has been wonderful, is really talking about how, because we sit in a space of media, of creative, of performance, it's helped us to understand how creative fits with all of that, and then how we can bring that to our clients as a kind of a full 360, rather than just in isolation as just a singular influencer agency.
And I actually have had the pleasure of working with a couple of you directly, and I think absolutely going on from what we've just discussed there, and I think, Emily, you just said influencers are amazing. I think something that I've seen directly with you guys and the teams that we're working with is probably one of the most pivotal points, especially with this huge conversation that's going on, and Chris mentioned earlier, brand safety, finding the right creator. You guys are not necessarily up against it, but you've got a task where you're working with so many industry verticals, so many different types of creators, different tiers, different kinds of briefs. I just didn't know whether anybody had a really good example of being able to identify, a really good creator that essentially maybe just changed the trajectory of a campaign outcome, and maybe if you have a framework in place with being able to find that right creator in such an environment that's moving nearly every day at the moment.
Jenny, happy to jump in. We're doing some quite interesting work around attention at the moment. And I say that because we're developing a framework which is going to allow us to be able to almost identify and select creators and create a talent based on the job to be done. So for those that you don't know, we've been working at Dentsu on sort of attention economy for years and years and years. And we had a hypothesis that, I think everyone in this room would agree, that influencer content gets your attention and retains it more than brand-led creative. But we wanted to prove it. So we've done some new research, which has, you'll be pleased to know, proven that. But it's also shown that not all creator content is equal and holds different types and levels of attention. And you need more time with people if you want to get them to think differently. So we're taking these findings and turning them into a framework which adds a bit of science into the mix, and we're also taking all those insights and codes and changing the creator briefs that we use so that creators themselves will be able to optimize their content without losing any authenticity, but with the confidence that they're actually getting the eyeballs and the attention of their audiences. So those kind of frameworks, I think everybody will have sort of different methodology, but the more we can almost take the subjectivity out of the selection and the strategies that sit around our creators, I think the easier it is for CMOs to make those significant investment decisions that we know that this discipline deserves.
Mm. And then I'd say in terms of the frameworks that we have, we talk a lot about like the strength of both the technology and also the experts that are working on it. It's like combination of like the brand safety metrics, the kind of engagement rate, those kind of fairly standard things, and also that kind of subjective judgment about like who is going to work best for the brand, who is going to like in terms of the content have the best kind of fit, be creating the right kind of work so that you can give a creator an open brief and be confident that they're going to deliver something that's perfect. And then you get to that kind of sweet spot of not being too directive and just giving them the freedom to create something that's going to work well for their audience and also for your brand.
I'm just going to quickly open this can whilst I can.
I've seen you tapping at that.
I'm doing it. I think it's so interesting hearing how differently we're all doing it. And I know one of the questions we talked about last week was how we all go up against each other as competitors. I've been thinking a lot about it over the weekend, and we're just all so different. And I think, listening to Julie and Emily, much more from the media standpoint of where they sit, I think where we are, we've developed as part of our outfit now being social and influencer fully embedded together, we've developed a process whereby we are able to now define and show and measure and manage a brand's social voice. It's a tool that we've built in-house, and what it's then been able to do now is help us find influencers and creators who sit with that brand's social voice. So often when we look at a brand's social voice, it's all over the place. Swims in a sea of sameness, has no direction. And when we show our clients and we say, look, this is actually how you're appearing in a way that shows them through data, they get very excited. But to now overlay that with these are the voices that we're going to be able to use to talk about your brand, to build your brand, it really begins to kind of gel it together. And that's been a really big success of what we're doing. And as well as really delving into how we find the right communities that we should be part of as well. I know I hate using all these buzzwords, but it's true. You asked, how do we find the creators of tomorrow? I think the stats are insane about the rise of creators. I think it's like 3,000% in the past 2 years of the choices we have out there. And so understanding the brand's social voice and where they are, who they are, looking through the communities and the subcultures, really delving into that, using the tooling, again, that we have to find that, enables us to kind of get laser sharp on the types of people we're looking for. And then, the tooling, such as you guys. And then, of course, hiring teams who are living and breathing this world and have amazing taste and are always on the hunt for the right talent. I think, remember, we're in a talent business. And my biggest fear on this world becoming heavily democratized through media is it becomes a commodity and not what it was about at the beginning, which is truly about the talent of people and authenticity.
And actually on that's a really interesting point. And I guess you've probably seen the way in which that you have to be consultative with the clients that you're working with, because you are at the front of the shifts that are happening so quickly. How have the conversations changed that you're having with your clients? Are you finding that there's some that are falling behind and maybe not listening as much? And how do you manage those conversations whereby maybe people and clients aren't as on board as you need them to be to drive this creative direction that you want to go in? How are you finding that change of conversation at the moment? Is it being well received? Is it slightly easier than you thought it would be? Or
I was just going to jump in and say I think that the conversation is happening at a kind of like CMO level all across in all the brands that we speak to now. I think the biggest challenge, for CMOs is really to be able to get the data that you mentioned there, Crystal, to be able to kind of then do the internal stakeholder influencing to make sure that the right level of budget is being spent. And then, as you said, Emily, it's about ecosystem thinking. It's about seeing like the entire spend that they're making across social and being able to optimize and turn those levers where necessary. But no, I think there's a huge openness and a hunger from clients that I'm speaking to understand what they can do differently, how we can support them doing that. And I think just a recognition that there is no immediate right answer. It is about testing and learning.
Yeah, I'd say we're seeing similar, like it's far more that clients are coming to us at a global level and they're starting to think far more about how can they have oversight of the different campaigns that are going on in local markets? How can they, at the most kind of forward-looking, reorganize themselves around like making sure they're recruiting the right kinds of people? So it's not something that's just picked up by a marketer generally. It's a real specialist role now on the client side as well. So I think there's definitely a large amount of progress. And I think for the more kind of tentative clients, there are always the kind of lower lift options. So it doesn't have to be a kind of fully global campaign. It could just be working with some nano influencers, doing something relatively light lift to gain some confidence and start to, like you're saying, test and learn on that kind of investment. But I think like the kind of groundswell of clients moving in that direction is significant. But I think there's a risk as well if you're not kind of taking part that you get left behind.
And I was just going to jump in there. We were talking about this last night. But I think that whole structure piece in terms of global versus local, where influencer sits not just with their agency network, but internally, I think that is kind of one of the biggest conversations that we're having with clients at the moment.
Yeah, and look, I think, you know, anybody else not really slept this year because everyone's coming for it now. You know, everybody is saying, I need influencers, I need creators. It's amazing, but also it's very tiring. However, I think it's terrifying for CMOs because I think for a lot of CMOs, it hasn't necessarily been part of what they've been doing. It's been other people, and now suddenly the spend is rising. Procurement are saying, do you realize how much you're spending across PR, events, you know, in marketing on all of these influencers, and saying we need to find efficiencies. And I also think if you ask a lot of like CMOs and they look at their kind of pages and who are representing their brand, it terrifies a lot of them because we have lost the brand in a lot of what we're doing. And we have to be really mindful of that. You know, we cannot just, you know, we have to think about the way that we are creating the strategy, how that strategy is being taken from a global to a local standpoint, what types of creators and influencers we're using, how they're talking, how they're representing the brand. Are we bringing brand codes, you know, not necessarily colors and logos, but brand codes into the work that we're doing so that it does have an ROI? Because if you start to look at some of the kind of, you know, hashtag of a brand and you look at all the people that are representing that brand, can we honestly say to ourselves, you know, that is creating brand value? That is creating brand equity. And then now when you look at the spend that is, you know, equated to that, you can see why there is a steep maturity curve that our industry has to go on. And I think, you know, we are really conscious of that and making the right hires in people and connecting the dots across our, you know, creative division, you know, and our strategy divisions for brand to try and leverage that and make sure that advocacy and influencer isn't just sitting in one division, it's running throughout the entirety of McCann World Group.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And actually a couple of points that you mentioned then is I would be really interested to know how involved do agencies get when content is being created? Because I think there's an extremely fine line of being able to strike a balance of, okay, Julie, you mentioned it earlier, creator authenticity, but also brand values and driving what the brand is and what they're about. How involved, and I guess this probably changes client to client, maybe even industry as well, but how involved are you guys as agencies with creating that content via the creator?
So I can say we'd always brief really carefully and we'd select the creators really carefully. And so I think like if you're doing those two things right, then the content that comes back should be kind of in line with, you know, what you're looking for. And we'd usually go through like a round of revisions. Maybe we'd get like a treatment and then review and sign off with the client. So like you say, really you want that authenticity, you want to give creators the kind of freedom. And I think this is part of the kind of conversation that's coming up now is around having more of those ongoing relationships with brands. So you give creators a bit more freedom to experiment. They know that this isn't a kind of one and done campaign that they're working on. They can kind of build up like the relationship that they have with the brand. They can get to know it better. They can integrate it more seamlessly. And so I think more brands are seeing that kind of benefit where they can go beyond the kind of social space as well and start to act in a more kind of ambassador style, so appearing at events, giving feedback on products, that kind of thing, and that really builds up a very strong relationship over time.
I think it varies depending on the ask, because I think that creators beyond creator content, have a huge creative input now into agencies. We have our own in-house creators on big campaigns. We'll get creators in to collaborate with other kinds of creatives. So I think actually working out how you collaborate effectively has been really transformative for most agencies, I would say, over the last couple of years.
Yes, it's similar to Julie. It's so different. You know, we have some creators who are part of what you would say more the big traditional campaigns, but are now appearing on platforms like Snapchat and TikTok rather than TV. And so we're working with big production crews. We're working with, you know, McCann creatives and strategists and inputting those. The team are there, helping to guide that conversation. Then also sometimes we're just the strategic agency. You know, we are building the strategic brief for the client in-house, and then you have to really think about, if I'm giving this brief to somebody else who's going to give it to somebody else, you know, what does that look like? How are they going to interpret it? And again, that's why I have to give another call out to how great our strategists are really thinking about that. And then, of course, yes, you know, the more traditional way of putting the brief together and sending it out and getting a storyboard done. But I do maintain that, you know, I still think a lot of creators, even though driving the authenticity train heavily, do need handholding. And the more that we, you know, start to use all varying different types of creators, and we aren't all talking about reach all the time, you know, there is going to be levels of what that handholding is. And I think that takes an intuitive team who understand the level of creator that they're working with, who understand the brand that they're working with, and can ensure that the brief, the strategy, the conversation, the agent conversation is all interwoven.
And you just mentioned then about using different types of creators. Obviously, reach is a big one. Just for the last couple of minutes that we've got, and I guess it ties in quite nicely if you look at the journey of, you know, starting off finding the right creator, the campaign execution, and the wrapping up and kind of measuring the success of what a good campaign is. I know what good looks like is something that we focused on a little bit earlier. It's a slightly more broad question, but obviously I would love to understand all of your takes on it. Is what would success look like? Are there any metrics now that you're looking at that maybe you weren't before? How are you advising clients to say, actually, you know, maybe we should be looking more at this metric, or we need to be measuring slightly differently now? Have those conversations started coming up a little bit more or less than you thought, or?
Yeah, I think it's a live conversation. Going back to some of the attention research that I talked about earlier, I mean, without any attention, there is no brand impact. You know, that is it fundamentally. So I think the work that we're doing, and we're actually showing clients that it's unbelievable when you look at how effective some of the more entertaining creator-led content can be in driving brand affinity, because it is holding people's attention 2-3 times longer than brand-led creative. And when you start to look at that, you also then start to look at the fact that you can completely revolutionize your media plan and your talent selection and use people for exactly what they are brilliant at, which drives effectiveness, but also efficiencies. So I think there's some really exciting stuff going on, which can only benefit creators actually in being able to prove their own value, because they do hold a huge amount of value, which often I don't think is being recognised in traditional metrics.
Yeah, totally. I think the measurement is getting more and more sophisticated over time. So we're definitely running a lot of similar studies, proving out the value of like influencer content alongside brand ads, tracking things like footfall in store. Like depending on what the KPIs are, you can get really quite granular now. I think overall, a successful partnership is when it's working really well both for the brand and the creator. So it's like a true partnership in that kind of way. And so, like as a brand, you're competing with other brands to work with the best creators, and there's going to be overlap necessarily. So I think that having a really strong offer in terms of like how you can work with creators and being attractive is definitely important, and having that kind of partnership that works well for both parties is a really important part of things.
Yeah, and understanding the sentiment that you're driving. But I think, I know I keep banging on about brand, but it's so important. And I think, we are really looking now at that brand endurance, and we're launching a study this year that will involve, the use of influencer and social, and exactly how we are building brand endurance and brand equity through the use of creators, because it's been shown that, the longer enduring brand, the more impact it has on your, share price and your actual value as a business. And so to be part of that study is going to be really, really interesting.
Fab. Ladies, we are at time. This is the first time in my life I've ended just before, so I'm expecting some kudos later. But yeah, ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. It was amazing. Thank you everybody so much for being here, and I hope everybody had a good time.